The year is 1993, and a hairdresser from Yorkshire, England is standing in front of a live BBC television audience, holding a blowtorch aimed directly at an egg. The flame burns at 1,100 degrees Celsius. The egg should be ash in under 10 seconds. After 5 full minutes, the host walks over and touches the eggshell with his bare hand. Completely cool. The audience goes absolutely wild. What coats that egg is a paste called Starlite, mixed in a garage by a man with no chemistry degree and no laboratory. NASA tested it. The United Kingdom's nuclear weapons establishment blasted it with heat equivalent to an atomic explosion, and it survived. The uncoated steel behind it vaporized instantly. Boeing wanted it. The U.S. military wanted it. Fire departments across America wanted it. The man who invented it looked every single one of them in the eye and said no. For 18 years straight, he said no. Then he died in 2011 and took the formula to his grave. No sample exists anywhere on Earth. No patent reveals the complete recipe. One of the most remarkable materials ever demonstrated on live television simply ceased to exist the moment one stubborn man from Yorkshire stopped breathing. And here is what should keep you glued to this until the very end. Starlite is not even close to the most shocking thing on this list. One of these 10 technologies worked so brilliantly and so far ahead of its time that the people who built it made a cold, calculated decision to destroy it rather than let the wrong hands have it. You will find out which one by the time this is done, but first you need to understand the pattern, because once you see it, you are going to start looking at the world very differently. Every single technology on this list was lost at the exact same moment. Not the same year, not the same decade, the exact same moment. The moment it was about to become available to everyone. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and understanding that pattern is the only way any of what follows makes sense. Human knowledge does not flow in one direction. It gets redirected by money, by politics, by powerful people who look at a brilliant invention and ask not how can this help people, but who does this hurt if it spreads? Medieval craftsmen guarded their trade secrets the way countries guard nuclear codes today. The only intellectual property protection that actually worked before lawyers existed was silence. And when those craftsmen died, when their guilds collapsed, when the empires that protected them fell, the silence became permanent. Every story you are about to hear follows the same arc. Something extraordinary gets invented. It works. It works better than anything that came before it. And then at the precise moment it threatens to escape the hands of the few and reach the many, it disappears. Keep that in your mind as each story unfolds, because the timing is going to start feeling very deliberate very quickly. The year is 674, and the greatest naval armada the ancient world had ever assembled is closing in on Constantinople. The Arab fleet outnumbers the Byzantine navy so dramatically that victory feels like a formality. Soldiers on those ships are probably already imagining what Constantinople looks like from the inside, and then something happens that none of them were prepared for. Bronze tubes mounted on the Byzantine ship bows fired jets of liquid fire that reach 15 meters across the water. Where the fire touches the ocean burns. Where it touches a wooden hull, the wood does not catch fire slowly. It is consumed instantly like paper held to a flame. Men dive overboard to escape and watch in disbelief as the fire follows them beneath the surface and keeps burning. The entire Arab fleet is destroyed. Constantinople survives. The same weapon is deployed again during a second Arab siege in 717 and drives them away a second time. Byzantine historian Theophanes documented the whole thing around 815. The weapon is Greek fire, invented by a Syrian engineer named Kallinikos, who defected to Constantinople and handed the empire a 600-year naval advantage in a single conversation. Then, somewhere between 1200 and 1300, the formula vanished so completely that modern chemists, using electron microscopy and computational modeling, cannot reconstruct it despite centuries of trying. J.R. Partington studied it in 1960. John Haldon investigated in 2006. Arab spies, Venetian spies, Genoese spies all devoted enormous resources to stealing it over hundreds of years, and every single one of them came back empty-handed. Here's the thing about that. If it was just oil and sulfur, why has nobody matched it in 800 years? What if Greek fire was not a formula, but a system where one group knew the chemistry, another built the bronze siphon tubes, and a third understood the deployment ratios, and no single person ever held all three pieces simultaneously? When any link in that chain broke, the whole thing became useless forever. The most devastating weapon in the ancient world may have been deliberately engineered to die with the civilization that created it. In 1901, sponge divers exploring a Roman shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera pulled up statues, pottery, coins, and one completely unremarkable corroded lump of bronze that sat in a museum drawer ignored for 50 years. In 1951, a Yale professor named Derek DeSola Price finally looked at it properly. His 1974 paper titled Gears from the Greeks told the world what it actually was: an astronomical calculator. A device the size of a shoebox, containing at least 30 bronze gears that tracked the sun, the moon, and every planet visible to the naked eye, predicted eclipses decades into the future, and compensated for the irregular elliptical orbit of the moon using a pin and slot mechanism that applied astronomical theories not officially understood until Kepler worked them out in the 1600s. The device contains differential gearing that Western engineers did not reinvent until the 1500s. That is a gap of 1,675 years. The gear teeth were hand-cut to tolerances under half a millimeter. CT scanning conducted by the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project between 2005 and 2021 confirmed all of this and added that the device contains over 3,500 characters of ancient Greek text, functioning as an instruction manual. The mainstream explanation is that it was a luxury item for a rich patron, and when Rome lost interest in Greek philosophy, this kind of craftsmanship simply stopped being commissioned. That sounds reasonable until you ask the obvious question. A device representing at minimum a century of progressive mechanical development left absolutely zero other traces. No simpler predecessors anywhere, no workshop debris, no failed experiments, no training texts. You do not design a 30-gear differential computer on your first attempt. There is a developmental tradition behind this object, and every single piece of it has vanished as if it was never there. Cicero mentioned in the 1st century BCE that Archimedes built a similar device. That device is gone too. This was not one object being lost, this was an entire engineering tradition being erased. Run your finger along a genuine Damascus steel blade, and the surface moves like water frozen in metal. That swirling pattern is not decoration, and it is not scratches. It is the visible signature of something happening inside the steel at a scale medieval smiths could not see and did not understand they were creating. From around 300 to 1750 of the Common Era, swordsmiths in the Middle East were producing blades that crusaders documented cutting through European swords like they were made of wood, holding edges sharp enough to split a silk scarf falling through the air, and surviving years of battlefield use that destroyed European blades in months. European smiths spent 4 full centuries trying to copy those blades, They had captured weapons to examine. They had craftsmen who defected and tried to explain the process. They had written metallurgical guides. They never got within touching distance of the real thing. Then, in 2006, Peter Paufler at the University of Dresden put genuine Damascus samples under a transmission electron microscope and found carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires inside the metal. Carbon nanotubes are cylindrical carbon molecules 1/billionth of a meter wide. Western science did not discover their existence until 1991. Medieval smiths working over charcoal fires with bare hands and basic tools were producing nanotechnology-level engineering in steel 1,300 years before the concept of nanotechnology existed in any laboratory on Earth. They were not trying to do this. They just followed oral traditions passed from master to apprentice, heating Indian woot steel with specific trace elements to precise temperature cycles that caused the carbon to organize itself at the nanoscale into structures that gave the blade its extraordinary properties. Around 1750, the specific Indian ore deposits dried up, and within one generation, the technique stopped completely. No gradual decline, no adaptation to different materials. It just stopped, as if something critical had been deliberately held back, rather than naturally forgotten. Stand inside the Pantheon in Rome and look straight up at the dome above you. It is 142 feet across, made entirely of unreinforced concrete with no steel rebar inside it, and it has been standing since 126 of the Common Era. That is just under 1,900 years. Now think about the nearest highway overpass near where you live. If it was built in the 1960s, it is probably already showing cracks and is likely scheduled for repair or replacement within the next decade. Roman concrete structures built directly in seawater are not just surviving, they are actively getting stronger, growing crystalline mineral formations inside themselves that fill microcracks and increase structural cohesion as the centuries pass. Modern concrete in seawater starts falling apart within 50 years. In 2013, researchers at UC Berkeley and the Italian National Research Council drilled cores from a 2,000-year-old Roman harbor breakwater and found self-healing crystal growth happening inside the material right now. In 2023, a team led by MIT researcher Admir Masic published the answer in Science Advances: hot mixing. The Romans used quicklime instead of slaked lime, which created a violently exothermic reaction during mixing that produced lime clasts everyone had previously dismissed as manufacturing defects. Those lime clasts are actually the entire point. When a crack forms, water infiltrates, dissolves the lime clast, and it recrystallizes as calcium carbonate, filling the crack before it can spread. The formula was written down by Vitruvius in 15 BCE. Engineers have known for 200 years that Roman concrete outlasts ours by an enormous margin. It took until 2023 to figure out the single most important reason why. A $1 trillion global concrete industry sat on top of that answer for a decade between 2013 and 2023, while American bridges and dams and harbor walls continued being built out of material that will need replacing inside of a human lifetime. Now, this is where most videos lose you, and this one is not going to, because the next 4 technologies are actually the most personal on this list and the most relevant to the world you live in right now. Stay with this. Maurice Ward did not die stubborn, he died smart, and the world punished him for it. Before Ward ever walked onto that BBC set, he had watched inventor after inventor do exactly what every expert advised: file the patent, sign the licensing deal, trust the legal system to protect you. And he had watched every single one of them get legally dismantled by corporations with rooms full of lawyers who reverse-engineered their work, made microscopic variations, filed competing patents, and left the original inventor with a legal battle they could not afford and a royalty check that never arrived. Ward was a hairdresser from Yorkshire. He had no legal team and no corporate structure. What he had was a material that NASA confirmed could withstand 10,000 degrees Celsius, and the street-level wisdom to understand that the moment he handed the formula to anyone under standard terms, he would never see a dollar from it. So he did something that looked irrational from the outside, but was actually the only rational play available to him. He made the world prove it wanted Starlite badly enough to offer him real protection. Boeing came, the UK Ministry of Defense came, fire safety companies across America came. Every offer arrived wrapped in fine print that Ward read carefully enough to say no to. He died in 2011, still waiting for an offer he could accept. His daughters said in 2018 the formula is in a safety deposit box. No sample has been independently verified since his death. Here is the part that should genuinely bother you. Ward died in 2011 at the exact moment SpaceX and Blue Origin were building reusable spacecraft and needed exactly what he had: a lightweight, paintable heat shield that does not burn away on re-entry and can be used again. That material would be worth billions today. The formula is sitting in a box that nobody will open. Ask yourself who benefits from it staying there. Here's a story that 3 separate Roman historians independently decided was worth writing down across a span of 200 years, and that most people have never heard. Sometime between 20 and 30 of the Common Era, a craftsman walked into Emperor Tiberius's court on the island of Capri carrying a glass bowl. He set it on the marble floor and dropped it. The bowl hit the marble with a sound like metal striking metal and did not shatter. It dented. The craftsman picked it up, pushed the dent out with his thumb, and handed it back to Tiberius without a scratch on it. This was his life's work and his moment of triumph. Tiberius looked at it for a long moment and asked one question: "Does anyone else know how to make this?" The craftsman told the truth. "No, Caesar, the secret belongs only to me." Tiberius had him executed on the spot, and the formula for unbreakable flexible glass died in that room. Pliny the Elder wrote this down in Natural History in 77. Petronius referenced it in the Satyricon. Dio Cassius repeated it in Roman history in the 3rd century. 3 independent sources across 200 years describing the same event. The standard academic response is that the glassmaker probably just made unusually strong tempered glass, and the story got embellished over retellings. But Pliny was not a gossip columnist. He was a meticulous naturalist who documented hundreds of materials and manufacturing techniques with scientific precision. And the embellishment theory never answers the actual question. If it was just strong glass, why did Tiberius have someone executed for it? Rome celebrated engineers who built better things. They did not execute people for making better cups, unless the material was so revolutionary it threatened the entire economy of the luxury goods market. Gold and silver dishware was between 10 and 100 times more valuable than glass. A material that looked like glass but could not break would have collapsed that market and taken enormous imperial tax revenue with it. Tiberius did not execute an inventor. He executed a threat to the treasury and buried the technology with him. Nikola Tesla stood in his Colorado Springs laboratory in 1899 and lit 200 light bulbs from 26 miles away without a single wire connecting them to anything. He wrote it down in his laboratory notes. That experiment happened, and nobody seriously disputes it. 2 years later, J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America and the man who controlled the country's electrical infrastructure through his investment in General Electric, gave Tesla $150,000 to build Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. The 187-foot tower was designed to do something that would have made Morgan's entire business model obsolete overnight: transmit electrical power to any point on the planet without wires, without meters, and without any mechanism for a utility company to charge anyone for using it. Free electricity everywhere. Morgan pulled the funding in 1903, the moment Marconi demonstrated cheaper transatlantic radio. Tesla could not find another investor. The tower stood unfinished until 1917, when the U.S. government had it demolished for wartime security reasons. The scrap metal raised $1,750. Tesla died broke and alone in a New York hotel room in 1943, and the FBI seized his papers within hours of his death. Some of those papers remain classified right now as you watch this. The official physics position is that wireless power transmission across global distances violates the inverse square law, and the energy losses would be too catastrophic to be useful. That is technically defensible. But classified papers do not get seized from pseudoscientists. They get ignored. The FBI walked into Tesla's room because someone in the United States government in 1943 believed his late-stage work was real enough to keep out of the wrong hands. J.P. Morgan did not pull funding because the physics failed. He pulled funding because free decentralized electricity with no billing mechanism was a direct existential threat to the metered power grid that was making him the wealthiest man in America. In 1936, an Austrian archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging artifacts at the Baghdad Museum when he noticed something sitting in a collection of clay jars from a Parthian site near Baghdad. Each jar was about the size of a large coffee mug. Inside each one was a seamless copper cylinder. Inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod suspended in the middle without touching the sides. Bitumen, asphalt, sealed the top. Koenig had seen this exact configuration in a physics class. It was a galvanic cell, a battery. He published a paper in 1938 saying exactly that. Replicas built by researchers at Smith College in 2010 generated 1.1 volts using vinegar as the electrolyte. The Mythbusters team connected 10 replicas in series in 2005 and got 4 volts out of them. These jars work as batteries. That is not a theory. That is a reproducible laboratory result. The official invention of the battery is attributed to Alessandro Volta in 1800. These jars are dated to somewhere between 200 BCE and 224 of the Common Era. They predate Volta by 2,000 years. In 1978, researcher Arne Egbrecht used a Baghdad battery replica to electroplate a silver statue with gold, using only materials available in the ancient world. If Parthian jewelers were doing this, it would mean they had a technique for making silver look like solid gold without actually using gold, and they would have protected that secret with everything they had. The 2003 looting of the Baghdad Museum during the Iraq War destroyed most of the original specimens. What survives is this. A seamless rolled and soldered copper cylinder is an expensive and labor-intensive object to make. The iron rod is cut to fit precisely without touching the copper, which is not a coincidence of storage, but an operational requirement of galvanic action. Nobody has ever found a single Parthian scroll stored inside one of these jars, despite the leading alternative theory being that they were scroll storage containers. Every surviving example is built to the same functional blueprint. Craftsmen do not build identical containers for a purpose they do not intend. Between 1923 and 1951, a Latvian immigrant named Edward Leedskalnin lived alone on a plot of land in Homestead, Florida, and built a structure out of over 1,100 tons of coral limestone entirely by himself. He was 5 feet tall and weighed 100 pounds. The single largest blocks he moved weighed 30 tons. He worked only at night, and the one rule he enforced without exception was that nobody was allowed to watch him work. In 1936, he relocated the entire structure 10 miles to a new site using a single hired truck and driver. The driver reported that every time he left to run an errand and came back, multi-ton blocks that had not been there before were already loaded onto the truck. No crane, no visible equipment capable of the task, nobody else present. The 9-ton gate he installed at the entrance is balanced so precisely that it rotates on its axis with the pressure of one finger. When the bearing finally wore out in 1986, it took a crew of 6 men and an industrial crane 3 weeks to fix it. Engineers who have studied every photograph of Leedskalnin's visible equipment reached the same conclusion. The wooden tripods in the pictures are roughly 15 feet tall. The pulleys are basic. The math does not work. Moving 30 tons with that equipment requires either a lever arm between 40 and 60 feet long or a mechanical winch with dozens of pulleys. Neither exists in any photograph ever taken of the site. He published a pamphlet called Magnetic Current in 1945 that described magnetism as the fundamental force underlying all physical phenomena. The flywheel generator he built and left on display at the site has been examined by engineers who cannot agree on what it was designed to do. He told anyone who would listen that he knew the secret of the pyramids. He died in 1951 and left no blueprints, no demonstrations, and no explanation. There is no formula in a safety deposit box. There is no paper trail. There is just a 9-ton gate that turned with one finger and 1,100 tons of coral stone moved by a 100-pound man working alone in the dark. The last one is a plant, and before you click away, hear the specific claim that 5 separate ancient medical writers made about it across 5 centuries. Cyrannus of Ephesus, a practicing gynecologist in the 2nd century of the Common Era, wrote that a dose of Silphium the size of a chickpea taken once a month prevented pregnancy with near complete reliability. If that is accurate, Silphium was more effective than modern hormonal birth control, which has a typical real-world efficacy of around 91%. Silphium grew wild in a 30-mile coastal strip in what is now eastern Libya and nowhere else on Earth. For 700 years, it was the most commercially valuable plant in the Mediterranean world. Pliny the Elder wrote in 77 that a single stalk was literally worth its weight in silver. The city of Cyrene printed it on their coins. Roman emperors had it served at state banquets. Hippocrates mentioned it as a contraceptive in the 5th century BCE. Every attempt to grow it anywhere other than that specific coastal strip failed completely. The last recorded stalk was sent to Emperor Nero sometime between 54 and 68 as a novelty. By the year 100, it was gone. In 2021, researcher Mahmut Miski at Istanbul University published a paper proposing that Ferula druidiana, a plant still growing in parts of Turkey, may be Silphium or its closest surviving relative based on habitat, physical description, and chemical profile. No institution has funded genetic analysis of ancient Silphium residue from the Cyrenaic coins sitting in museum collections around the world right now, despite the technology to do that analysis existing for decades. a plant documented by multiple independent medical writers across 5 centuries as the most effective contraceptive in the ancient world, is sitting unidentified in an extinct species category that no serious research program has prioritized finding. The tools exist, the collections exist. Someone would just have to decide it was worth looking for. 10 technologies. 2,500 years of documented human achievement across 4 continents. Every single one of them worked. Every single one of them is gone. And now that you have heard all 10, the pattern should be sitting right in front of you, exactly as promised. Greek fire survived 600 years while the Byzantine Empire kept exclusive control of it, and vanished within a generation of that control weakening. The Antikythera tradition survived while Greek intellectual culture had imperial backing, and disappeared when Rome decided philosophy was less useful than conquest. Damascus steel survived 1,400 years while the specific ore that made it possible was scarce enough to limit who could produce it, and died the generation that scarcity became theoretically surmountable. Roman concrete survived while a unified empire enforced its use, and then sat in plain sight on harbor walls for 1,500 years while nobody looked hard enough at it. Starlite survived while one man held the formula and ceased to exist the day he did. Flexible glass survived until Tiberius understood it could not be kept secret. Wardenclyffe survived until Morgan understood it had no billing mechanism. The Baghdad battery technique survived while the guild lineages transmitting it orally stayed intact. Leedskalnin's method survived exactly as long as Leedskalnin did. Silphium survived until the demand for it outpaced the geography that protected it. Every single technology on this list was lost within one human generation of the moment it threatened to become available to people who did not already control it. That is the pattern. Not conspiracy in the dramatic sense, not careless negligence. A mechanism, precise and repeatable across 2,500 years of human history. Technologies survive exactly as long as they remain in the hands of the few. The moment they approach the hands of the many, they become dangerous to someone with the power to ensure they do not complete that journey. Sit with that for a moment, and then ask yourself what technologies exist right now sitting in that exact window between the few and the many. Because if the pattern holds, and it has held without exception across every case on this list, then some of what exists today in a laboratory or a patent filing or a safety deposit box in Yorkshire is already in the last generation of its existence. 100 years from now, someone is going to be watching a list just like this one and wondering how those technologies disappeared. The answer is going to be the same answer it has always been. They did not disappear. Someone made sure they left.